Ukraine victories unleash Kremlin infighting. A string of victories in the Kharkiv Oblast has suddenly turned the Ukraine war in Kyiv's favor, sending the Kremlin into a panic. The response was swift. Knowing that Russia lacks the manpower and coordination to quickly turn the tide in the invasion, President Putin decided to annex the 4 occupied oblasts of Ukraine. This move was internationally condemned, and only Russia's veto power in the UN Security Council avoided the sentiment being officially recorded in a UNSC draft resolution. But these annexations are arguably meant for a different audience: the hardliners in Putin's inner circle, who together are desperate for any semblance of a short-term victory. Unsurprisingly, these mounting military setbacks in Ukraine have not been taken well by the Russian mod and hardline factions fighting for influence in the Kremlin. But the most deeply symbolic victory for Kyiv was undoubtedly the, yet unclaimed, attack on the Kerch Bridge in Crimea, an explosion that came on Putin's own birthday no less. The attack left the bridge temporarily inoperable, with transit reduced to a relatively slow ferry service. The Kerch attack is viewed as a massive blow to Russian imperialistic power, as the bridge was frequently portrayed as a symbol of the Putin era, and in more tangible terms it forms the main supply lines for Russian forces in the south and east of Ukraine. The loss of the bridge leaves the railway links from Melitopol as the main supply route for Russian troops in Ukraine's occupied oblasts. The railways are within HIMARS range, and if Ukraine retakes Melitopol or damages the rails, the Russian mod will struggle to supply overextended forces in Kherson and Zaporizhia. These setbacks are not without their consequences in Kremlin circles. Sergei Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, has taken the brunt of criticism from hardliners like Chechen head and warlord Ramzan Kadyrov and Wagner founder Yevgeny Prigozhin. Recall that, during the 2008 Russian invasion of Georgia, the international response was incredibly mild. Putin got off the hook with a mild rhetorical reprimands and even new gas deals in Europe. In Syria, the U.S. warned of major consequences for chemical weapons use in the country, but when they were actually used, the hammer never came down. The initial response to Russia's partial annexation of Ukraine in 2014 followed the same pattern, with aid to Ukraine mostly being restricted to the non-lethal sort, at least until total war broke out earlier this year. Independent of the Russian military, Prigozhin has continuously ordered Wagner-led forces to assault Bakhmut in Donetsk over the past 3 months. Despite the bare minimal progress on this front, the operation has been well received on Russian Telegram channels, as it is a rare example of Russia reversing ZSU gains. The timing of the push is interesting. It could be a potential power play as Prigozhin looks to build up his reputation as one of the few remaining competent military commanders Russia has left in the conflict. As the list of battlefield victories for Kyiv continues to grow, so too does political pressure at home for Moscow. A potential power move by Wagner, Kadyrov's Chechen factions, and/or pro-war oligarchs could take place at any time, producing either a coup or fracture of the republic and potentially necessitating the redeployment of military assets currently in Ukraine. As the main Russian military is already decimated in man and material and stretched incredibly thin, this dynamic amounts to a powder keg at the heart of the Russian state. Disastrous handling of wars has always been a downfall of dictators, even in Russia's own history after a humiliating defeat against Japan and during World War I. The Russo-Ukrainian War could eventually bring about the downfall of Putin, but the world might not like who steps into the void to replace him. This podcast is created by Kronos Worldwide Productions.